everyone, my name is Mosana. I'm a fourth year biomedical and chemical engineering student here at McMaster University. Today I'm going to be talking about the triple bottom line of sustainability and the different types of quantitative measures that we use to help characterize it. Before continuing on, I want to give a big thank you again to the people that make these videos possible, McMaster Chemical Engineering and the MACC. If you guys have any questions, please make sure to write them down and I'll get to them at the end of this video. Without further ado, let's jump into the video. All right, so what is the triple bottom line of sustainability? It's often referred to as the TBL in industry, and it can best be thought of as these three pillars here that allow us to evaluate a company's impact while keeping all three of them at an equal weight. So first up, we have economics, and then we have environmental, and then we have society. Now, the TBL also exposes a company's value system. So if they're really keen on, hitting their target sale numbers, or they're really in it for the economical gain, we'll kind of see how the other two get neglected, and this works vice versa for each of the 3 points. And just to give you guys a little bit more context, it can kind of be also understood as, if you look at how we spend our money now, so as we become more aware of how the simple decisions that we make in our everyday life can either harm the environment over a long period of time, or we can help improve it and make more environmentally friendly decisions. So as little as, picking reusable bags instead of plastic bags, or even bigger, buying an electric car instead of a car that takes gas. These little decisions and changes that we are all making as we are becoming more aware and educated about our current environmental status is something that companies are picking up on. So they can not only market their products to appeal to us who are really trying to make these positive changes, but also they can implement more environmentally friendly practices into their supply chains, into their processes that make their products available to us, and that will in turn get them more sales. So you can kind of see how they're all connected, how a society's opinion or mindset towards the environment can either positively or negatively impact a company's economical gain. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the 3 characteristics and provide you guys with quantitative measures for each of them. And you guys will be able to use these measurements to really compare between different companies and ultimately, decide who you want to invest your money with and whose products you want to buy. First up, we have the environment. So this really speaks to what we learned in the first module. If you guys recall the natural steps definition, and here we're just reiterating that with mentioning that how a company or an industry chooses to preserve the environment and the choices they make with aiming to preserve the limited resources. That's what the environment pillar is getting at. And for quantitative measures for the environment, there are 2 that I'm going to talk about. So first up, we have the LCA, the life cycle analysis, and second, we have cost of CO2 or carbon dioxide avoided. All right, so what is the life cycle analysis? Now, before I go into this, I want to give you guys kind of a disclaimer. The LCA is something that can be very complicated, thorough, and it's a very in-depth analysis and can get quite complicated. Today I'm going to give you guys the simplified, definition / understanding of what it is. With that being said, let's learn about what an LCA is. So it can be simply thought as determining not only the direct but indirect impacts one's process might have on the environment over the entire course of the life cycle. So everything and anything from gathering your raw materials up until the product's end of its life cycle. So when it's time to dispose, recycle, and get rid of the product. And it's really important to define your boundaries. So as I mentioned, it can get very complicated as there are so many different factors that go into doing this analysis. But if you mark your boundaries and work within it, it's attainable and it really allows you to focus on what you're trying to teach or write about or relay to other people. So cost of CO2 avoided. Its units are dollars per ton, and it can be simply understood using this equation. So we have the extra money one spends to do something more green divided by the greenhouse gas emissions avoided by doing that more green process. And again, this can be used to compare two processes and ultimately help you make a decision as to which process is better for our environment. So the second pillar that I want to talk about belongs to the TBL is economics. So if you guys recall last video, I asked you how far will a company go in terms of their sustainable efforts until it hurts their pockets. And this point is really just reiterating that fact and essentially getting at that companies will not really feel compelled to make these positive choices for our environment if there's nothing in it for them. So if there's no money, sales, endorsements, advertisements, it's really hard to encourage them to make these choices. And yeah, that's what the economic pillar is getting at. We just talked about the economics pillar, and now we're going to discuss its metric that's most commonly used, the total annualized costs, which is comprised of total annual costs and capital costs. The annual costs are referring to things like paying for utilities, paying for employees as wages, paying for insurance, just those continuous costs that you pay yearly. And then we have our capital costs. Now the capital cost is referring to your upfront costs. For example, if you decide to buy machinery for your factory and you pay for it all at once, if you decide to buy land, property to build your factory on and you pay for that all at once, those would be considered your upfront costs. And just to write out the formal definition for you guys, or the formal equation, not the definition. So the total annual cost is, as I mentioned, your utilities, for example, those type of costs, and then your capital costs. Here you guys can see that I've divided it by something called the payback period. So the payback period will typically be smaller for shorter projects, being that you need a quicker return. And then for bigger projects and bigger companies, you'll see that this payback period is a little bit longer as a greater investment is required to remain competitive in these really big industries. And yeah, this simple definition really goes a long way, and we're going to use it to solve an example problem in the next segment. So our example is going to be calculating the total annualized cost for Apple. I have here some arbitrary data on a few expenses that companies typically have, and we're going to go through each of them, and I'm not going to tell you explicitly if it's an annual cost or a capital cost, but if you listen carefully, I think you guys will be able to tell. Also, another thing is, I'm not sure if you can see it too clearly, but the payback period that we are going to use for this example is 10 years. So when calculating your total annualized cost, you want to make sure that you use that number. So let's go through each of the expenses. So insurance for Apple is something that's going to be a continuous expense. The wages and benefits will also be a continuous expense. And utilities, continuous expense. But the equipment is going to be something that Apple buys all at once. They're going to pay for it up front. And then advertisement will also be continuous. I hope that helped, but I'm very confident that you guys will be able to determine which are annual costs and which are upfront costs. Oh, and another thing I want you guys to do, sorry, I forgot to mention, before looking at the solution, I want you guys to pause the video and try to do it by yourself first. And then you can see if you guys got the same number and look to see where you might have gone wrong if you didn't. Okay, So the grand finale, the number we have is $1,163,000. If you, again, didn't get this number, I highly recommend looking at what I counted as total annual costs, what I counted as a capital cost, and then make sure that you divide it by the 10 years, because a lot of people forget that, and that's an easy mistake. So yeah, that's how you calculate the total annualized cost. So the third pillar belonging to the TBL of sustainability is the concept of societal impact. And this really just speaks to the fact that you may have a process that's super affordable and environmentally friendly, but doesn't align with the people in that area's religious beliefs, their cultural customs, and their political views. There's many different things that ultimately can result in the society rejecting the process or the product. Society is also one of those things where it's really hard to quantitatively measure. Unlike our other two pillars, we were able to use the cost of CO2 avoided, we were able to use the TAC metric. But what's really, I guess, best for society is to do your research and try your best to really understand those that live in the region in which you hope to make a change / implement a new process. All right, so that concludes today's module. If you guys are interested in learning about the 7 sins, make sure to stay tuned to next week's video, module number 3. See you all there.